The Long Way Home, Part 1. The Wrong Turn. It was a quiet evening. The sky was painted with colors of orange and pink as the sun was setting. James was on his way home from work. He was tired and wanted nothing more than to reach home, sit on his couch, and relax. He knew the way home very well. He had taken the same road every day for many years. But today, something felt strange. James noticed that the usual road he took was blocked by construction signs. There was a big, orange sign saying, "Detour." He sighed, knowing he'd have to take a different route. He glanced at the GPS on his phone, which showed an alternate way. He had never taken this path before, but it seemed easy enough. James turned onto the new road. At first, it looked normal, just like any other road, lined with trees and houses. But as he drove, he noticed something odd. The houses were old, and the trees looked bigger, darker, and wilder. There was a strange silence around him, and no other cars on the road. It felt like he was the only one driving through this quiet, lonely place. He checked his GPS again, but it had stopped working. The screen was blank. He tapped it a few times, hoping it would start again, but nothing happened. "Great," he muttered, feeling a bit annoyed. But he kept driving, thinking he would eventually find a familiar road. As he continued, the road seemed to twist and turn in strange ways. It didn't feel right. Every turn he took led him deeper into unknown territory. James began to feel a bit uneasy. This wasn't just any road. It was like it was leading him somewhere on purpose. The houses started to disappear, and soon he was surrounded by only tall, shadowy trees. In the quietness of the road, he started to remember his childhood. Memories of playing in the park, riding his bike, and spending time with his family came back to him. These were memories he hadn't thought about in years. A part of him wanted to turn around, go back, and find the main road. But another part of him felt drawn to keep going forward, as if something was waiting for him at the end of this road. After what felt like hours, James saw a light up ahead. It looked like a house. Finally, he thought, maybe someone could give him directions. As he got closer, his heart began to pound. The house looked exactly like his own house. The same white walls, the same front yard, even the same swing hanging from the tree. Everything looked so familiar, yet something felt different. James parked his car and stepped out. The air was cool, and there was a strange calmness around him. Slowly, he walked towards the house. As he reached the front door, he noticed a pair of children's shoes on the doorstep. But James didn't have any children. He hesitated, then knocked on the door. After a few moments, the door opened. A woman stood there, smiling warmly. She looked like she was expecting someone, but when she saw James, her face changed. She looked confused. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice gentle but surprised. James was equally confused. I think I might be lost," he stammered. "This house, it looks just like mine." The woman tilted her head and studied his face carefully. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Because This is our home. James felt a chill run down his spine. He looked past the woman into the house and saw a family sitting at the dinner table. A man, a woman, and 2 children. They were laughing and talking, but James didn't recognize any of them. It was like looking at a life that could have been his, but wasn't. The woman at the door looked at him with pity in her eyes. "I think you must be very tired," she said kindly. "Maybe you should find your way home." James nodded slowly, not sure what to say. He backed away from the door, feeling strange and lost. As he walked back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just seen a ghost, or maybe he was the ghost in someone else's life. He got back into his car, started the engine, and took a deep breath. The road back felt just as long and twisted as before, but he was ready to find his real home, if it was still there waiting for him. Part 2. The Memories Along the Road. James drove away from the strange house, feeling like he was in a dream. The road in front of him seemed even darker and quieter now. He kept looking in his rearview mirror, expecting to see that woman or the family standing in the doorway. But there was no one. The house was gone, swallowed up by the darkness and trees. As he drove, the road twisted and turned, as if it had a mind of its own. James tried to stay calm, but he couldn't ignore the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. What was that house? And who were those people? They looked so comfortable, as if they had lived there for years. But James didn't know them. And yet that house looked exactly like his. He thought about calling someone, but his phone still wasn't working. The GPS was frozen, and there was no signal. He was completely alone on this strange road. There was nothing he could do but keep driving, hoping that he would find a way out. As he continued, he noticed something odd about the trees. They seemed familiar, as if he had seen them before. They were tall and old, with thick branches that stretched over the road, blocking out the sky. The leaves rustled softly in the wind, creating a low, whispering sound. Then, a flash of memory came to him. He remembered being a child, running through a forest just like this. He could see himself laughing, playing hide and seek with his friends. He hadn't thought about that memory in years, but now it was so clear. He could almost hear his own laughter, echoing through the trees. James shook his head, trying to focus. "This isn't real," he whispered to himself. "It's just my imagination." But the memories kept coming, one after another, as if the road itself was pulling them out of him. He remembered his first bicycle, a bright red one his parents had given him for his birthday. He had ridden it everywhere, feeling like he could go anywhere. He had even dreamed of riding it across the country, visiting all the cities and seeing the world. But as he grew older, he forgot about those dreams. Life became busy, and the bike was left behind, gathering dust in the garage. Then he remembered his high school days. He could almost see his old school, the big red brick building with its tall windows. He remembered his friends, the ones he used to laugh with, play sports with, and talk to about everything. But as time passed, they all went their separate ways, and he lost touch with them. He hadn't thought about them in years. James glanced out the window and saw the shapes of old, broken-down houses along the road. They looked abandoned, with shattered windows and roofs covered in vines. He could almost feel the emptiness inside those houses, the silence of memories long forgotten. And then he remembered his first job. He had been so excited, ready to prove himself and make a difference. He had big dreams back then. But as the years went by, he found himself stuck in routines, doing the same things every day. The excitement faded, replaced by the dullness of everyday life. The road seemed endless. James looked at the clock on the dashboard, but it wasn't working. Time felt strange here, like it was stretching on and on. He felt as if he had been driving for hours, maybe even days. The memories continued to come, each one bringing a different feeling. Some made him smile, while others made his chest feel heavy. He remembered moments of happiness, like family dinners, birthday parties, and holidays. He could see his parents, laughing and smiling, and his sister, who always made him laugh with her silly jokes. But he also remembered moments of sadness, arguments, lost friendships, and regrets. He remembered things he wished he could change, things he wished he could say. He thought about all the people he had lost touch with, all the dreams he had given up on. It was as if the road was taking him through his life, showing him all the moments he had forgotten. James began to wonder if he was going crazy. Maybe he was just tired, and his mind was playing tricks on him. But everything felt so real, so clear, like he was reliving each memory all over again. Then, he saw another light up ahead. His heart leaped. Maybe this was a way out. Maybe he would finally find someone who could help him. As he got closer, he saw that it was another house. It looked familiar, just like the last one. James parked the car and got out, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. The house looked almost exactly like the one he had seen earlier, with the same white walls and the same small front yard. But there was something different about this one. The windows were dark, and the place looked empty. He walked up to the front door and knocked, but there was no answer. The house was silent. He tried the door, and to his surprise, it opened. Slowly, he stepped inside. The air inside the house was cold and smelled like dust. The furniture was covered with white sheets, and everything looked old and forgotten. James walked through the rooms, feeling like he was walking through someone else's life. There were photos on the walls, but when he looked closely, he couldn't see the faces clearly. They were blurry, like faded memories. In one of the rooms, he found a small, dusty table with a few items on it. There was an old watch, a book, and a small toy car. The sight of the toy car brought back another memory. A memory of himself as a little boy, playing with toy cars in his room. He could almost hear his mother's voice calling him for dinner. He picked up the toy car and held it in his hand, feeling the weight of it. It was just a small toy, but it held so many memories. He put it back on the table, feeling a strange sadness wash over him. As he walked back to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that there was something important he needed to remember. He got into the car and started the engine, hoping that he would finally find his way home. The road stretched out in front of him, dark and silent. He took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly. This time, he told himself, he wouldn't get lost. He would find his way back. But as he drove away, he couldn't help but wonder, was he really lost on this road? Or was this road leading him to something he needed to find? Part 3. The Old Man on the Road. James drove on, feeling like he was trapped in a strange loop. The road stretched endlessly before him, twisting and turning in ways that felt almost unnatural. The trees stood tall and dark on either side, their branches reaching out like shadows. The silence weighed heavily around him, and each mile felt like it took him further away from reality. As he continued, he saw a figure up ahead. It was an old man, standing on the side of the road. James slowed down, feeling both relief and curiosity. He hadn't seen a single person since he'd started on this strange path. And now, here was someone. Maybe this man could help him find his way home. James stopped the car and rolled down the window. The old man looked at him with sharp, knowing eyes. He wore a thick coat and held a wooden cane in his hand. His face was lined with wrinkles, and his expression was serious. "Good evening," James said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I think I might be lost. Can you help me find my way back to the main road?" The old man tilted his head, studying James closely. He didn't speak right away, but his gaze felt intense, as if he could see right into James's soul. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft but clear. "Sometimes the road we take isn't about where we're going," he said slowly. "Sometimes it's about what we're meant to remember." James felt a chill run down his spine. There was something strange about this man's words, something that felt almost like a warning. "I just want to go home," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think I've taken a wrong turn." The old man nodded slowly. "Home," he said, as if the word held a deeper meaning. "Are you sure you know where that is?" James felt confused. What did he mean? Of course he knew where home was. It was the small house he'd lived in for years, with his familiar couch, his bed, his kitchen. But as he thought about it, he realized something unsettling. When he had reached the house that looked like his, he hadn't felt the usual warmth of home. Instead, he felt like an outsider looking in on someone else's life. The old man seemed to sense his confusion. "Home is not just a place," he continued. "It's the memories, the choices, the people who make up your life. Sometimes, you must face your past before you can truly return home." James didn't understand what the man was talking about. He just wanted directions, not a lesson on life. But something about the man's words stirred feelings within him. Feelings of things left undone, of choices he had made long ago that still haunted him. "Do you know where this road goes?" James asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. The old man gave a small smile. "This road leads you back," he said. "Back to the moments you forgot, to the things you left behind. It's not an easy road, but it's the only way to find what you're looking for." James felt frustrated. Why couldn't he get a simple answer? I just need to get back to my life. I don't need to be reminded of things I've already left behind, he said, feeling impatient. The old man looked at him with a hint of sadness in his eyes. Sometimes we leave things behind too soon, he said gently. Sometimes the things we forget are the things we need most. With that, the old man turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. James wanted to call after him, to ask him more, but he felt rooted to his spot. The man's words echoed in his mind, leaving him feeling both confused and uneasy. As he sat there, alone in his car, memories started to come back to him. Memories he hadn't thought about in years. He remembered his mother's voice, telling him stories before bed. He remembered the smell of his father's old cologne, the way his sister used to laugh, the warmth of his family during the holidays. He thought about the dreams he once had, the things he had hoped to do with his life. When he was young, he had so many ideas, so much excitement. But somewhere along the way, he had let go of those dreams. Life had become about work, bills, and routines. He realized that he had been so focused on moving forward that he had never stopped to think about what he was leaving behind. James felt a pang of regret. He wondered if the old man was right. Maybe there was more to finding his way back than just reaching his house. Maybe he needed to confront these memories, these lost pieces of himself, before he could truly feel at home again. Taking a deep breath, James started the car again. He didn't know where this road would lead him, but he felt a strange determination to keep going. He wanted to understand why these memories were coming back, why this road seemed to be leading him into the past. As he drove, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly. The trees grew thicker and the shadows deeper. The silence was almost overwhelming, but James found himself thinking more clearly. He remembered old friends he hadn't spoken to in years, people who had once meant everything to him. He thought about choices he had made, moments where he had chosen the easy path over the right one. He began to feel a strange mixture of sadness and hope, as if he was peeling back layers of himself he had long ignored. For the first time in years, he felt like he was truly facing who he was, both the good and the bad. The road twisted again, and up ahead, James saw another light. His heart quickened. Would this be another house, another glimpse into a life that wasn't his? He didn't know what he would find, but he felt ready to face it. As he approached, he saw that it was indeed another house. But this one looked different. It was smaller, more humble, with a worn wooden porch and a single light flickering in the window. It looked like a place he had once known, a place from long ago. James parked the car and stepped out, feeling a strange pull towards the house. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. As he reached the door, he hesitated. The memories were so close now, almost overwhelming him. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. After a moment, the door opened. A young woman stood there, her face filled with surprise. She looked familiar, but James couldn't place her. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile, and something about her felt comforting. "James?" she asked, her voice soft. James felt a shiver run down his spine. Yes. Do I know you? He asked, unsure of how to respond. The woman nodded, her smile widening. I'm someone you once knew. Someone from a time you left behind. James felt a wave of emotions, memories flooding back. He looked at her, trying to remember, to piece together the fragments of his past. She was someone he had cared about deeply, someone he had left behind when life pulled him in a different direction. He took a step back, feeling overwhelmed. I don't understand. Why am I here? The woman's gaze softened. You're here because you needed to remember. Sometimes to find our way forward, we have to revisit the past. We have to face the things we left behind, the choices we made, and the people we lost. James felt tears prick his eyes. He had spent so long running from these memories, from the regrets that haunted him. But now here he was, face to face with his past. The woman took his hand, her touch warm and familiar. You've been lost for a long time, James, she whispered. But it's never too late to find your way back. James felt a sense of peace wash over him. For the first time, he understood why this road had led him here. It wasn't just about finding his way home. It was about finding himself, about reconnecting with the parts of himself he had forgotten. As he stood there, holding her hand, he felt a spark of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew he wasn't alone. He had faced his past, and now he was ready to move forward. With a final, deep breath, he thanked her and walked back to his car. The journey wasn't over, but he felt lighter, more at peace. He started the engine, ready to continue on the road, and this time, he knew he was on the right path. Part 4. Shadows of the Past. As James continued driving, the sense of peace he'd felt after meeting the young woman started to fade, replaced by a creeping unease. The road stretched endlessly in front of him, winding deeper into the darkness. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching him. The trees seemed to grow denser, their branches stretching over the road like bony fingers. The memory of the young woman lingered in his mind. Who was she, really? Her face was familiar, but he couldn't place her name. Yet, her words had resonated with him. He had been lost for a long time, lost in routine, in regrets, in paths that had led him further from his true self. The night felt heavier, pressing down on him as he drove. Suddenly, a dense fog appeared out of nowhere, surrounding his car and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. James slowed down, gripping the steering wheel tightly, squinting to make out the road. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the engine and the crunch of gravel under his tires. Then, through the fog, he saw a faint light, a soft, golden glow coming from a house on the side of the road. It looked old, worn down, like a place frozen in time, but the sight of it gave him a strange sense of comfort, as if it was calling to him. He parked his car by the side of the road and stepped out, his feet crunching on the gravel. The fog swirled around him, muffling all sound, as if he were stepping into another world. As he walked closer, He noticed that the house was surrounded by a garden overgrown with wildflowers and tall grass. The windows were dusty, but a soft light flickered inside, as if someone was waiting for him. James hesitated at the doorstep, a feeling of familiarity washing over him. This place felt like a dream, like something he had seen before but couldn't fully remember. With a deep breath, he knocked on the door. The door creaked open on its own, revealing a dimly lit room. Inside, there was an old sofa, a small coffee table, and a fireplace that crackled with warmth. The smell of wood smoke filled the air, bringing back memories of winter nights spent by the fire. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The room was silent except for the gentle crackling of the fire. James noticed an old photo on the wall, a picture of a family. He walked closer, squinting to make out the faces. The father in the photo looked strangely familiar. He wore a warm smile, and his eyes had the same tired, hopeful look that James often saw in his own reflection. James took a step back, feeling a sudden rush of emotions. Was this his own family? He didn't remember this house, this place, but the photo seemed to pull at him, whispering of memories buried deep within. Then, he heard a soft voice behind him. "James," the voice said, gentle and warm. He turned around quickly and saw an older woman standing in the doorway to another room. She wore a long, faded dress, and her face was wrinkled with age but softened by kindness. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of sadness and love, and her smile was one he had known once, long ago. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "It's been so long, my son." James felt his chest tighten. He hadn't seen his mother in years. She had passed away when he was young. Yet, here she was, standing in front of him, as real as the night itself. He felt a mixture of disbelief and a longing so deep that it hurt. He took a step forward, his voice shaking. How is this possible?" She smiled, reaching out to touch his face. Her hand was warm, gentle, just as he remembered. "Sometimes, the heart brings us back to places we need to see," she said softly. "Places we need to remember." James felt tears welling up in his eyes. There were so many things he wished he could say, things he had held inside for years. "I've missed you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "There were so many things I wanted to tell you. So many times I needed your advice." His mother nodded, understanding. "You were always so hard on yourself, James," she said gently. "Always trying to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You didn't have to do it alone." He lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He had tried to handle everything alone, believing that he needed to be strong, that he couldn't show weakness. But deep down, he had missed her guidance, her comfort. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch filling him with warmth. "You don't have to keep running from your past, James," she said softly. "The choices you made, the people you left behind, they are all a part of who you are. And they have led you here." James felt a strange peace settle over him. The anger, the regrets, the missed chances. All of it felt distant, as if her presence was washing it all away. For the first time, he didn't feel lost. He felt home. He looked into her eyes, the tears now streaming down his face. "I don't want to leave you again," he whispered, his voice breaking. She smiled sadly, brushing a tear from his cheek. "This is not goodbye, my son. I will always be with you, in your heart, in your memories. And as long as you remember me, I am never truly gone." They stood there, wrapped in a moment that felt like it could last forever. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving just the two of them, connected by a bond that death could not break. After a while, she took a step back, her form beginning to fade like a shadow in the morning light. "Remember, James," she whispered, "home is not a place. It's the people we love, the memories we keep, the choices we make." James reached out, trying to hold on to her, but she slipped through his fingers, vanishing into the warm glow of the room. He stood there, feeling both a deep sadness and a profound sense of peace. He took one last look around the room. The old sofa, the crackling fire, the picture on the wall. Everything felt so real, yet he knew it was time to leave. This place, this memory, had given him what he needed. With a heavy but hopeful heart, he stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The fog had lifted, and the road ahead was clearer now, stretching out under a sky filled with stars. James climbed back into his car, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. His mother's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that he wasn't truly alone. He had faced his past, confronted the ghosts of his regrets, and in doing so, had found a part of himself he thought he'd lost. As he drove away, the house slowly faded into the night, a part of the memories he would carry with him forever. The journey wasn't over yet, but for the first time, James felt like he was on the right path. He was going home, not to a place, but to a state of peace and acceptance he hadn't felt in years. And as he drove, the stars above seemed to guide him, lighting the way forward on the road that would lead him back to himself. Part 5. The Crossroads. James continued down the quiet, winding road, feeling the weight of his recent encounter with his mother. His heart was full of emotions he couldn't quite explain. Sadness, relief, and, more than anything, a sense of peace. He had seen the face of someone he loved, someone he had lost, and the encounter had brought him a strange sense of healing. But his journey wasn't over yet. The night was darker now, with only the faint glimmer of stars lighting the road. James kept his hands steady on the steering wheel, his eyes focused ahead. He noticed something unusual about this part of the road. It didn't seem to be leading anywhere familiar. The trees on either side were tall and twisted, their branches forming eerie shapes. The silence around him was almost complete, broken only by the soft hum of his car's engine. He began to wonder if he was truly lost. He had been driving for what felt like hours, but every twist and turn on the road seemed to look the same. The feeling of unease returned, creeping up his spine. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard, but strangely, it had stopped working. The time was frozen, as if this road existed outside of time itself. Just then, his headlights caught something in the distance. It was a signpost at a fork in the road, with two arrows pointing in opposite directions. As he got closer, he slowed down to read it. The left arrow read, "Return to the past." The right arrow read, "Face the truth." James felt his heart begin to race. The decision in front of him felt like more than just a simple choice of direction. Both paths seemed to carry a deep significance, pulling him in different ways. He pulled over, turned off the engine, and sat in silence, staring at the sign. His mind raced back to all he had experienced on this strange journey. The memories he had faced, the loved ones he had left behind, the regrets he had carried with him for so long. All of it seemed to come together in this single moment. He knew that whatever he chose would shape him forever. The left path, return to the past, tempted him with the chance to relive memories, to perhaps find answers he had always wanted. Felt safe, familiar. But he knew that going down that road would mean revisiting old wounds, getting lost in moments he could never change. The right path, face the truth, felt more uncertain. He didn't know what kind of truth awaited him or what it would demand of him. But he sensed that this path was about moving forward, about finding clarity, even if it was difficult to bear. As he sat there, lost in thought, he remembered his mother's words. Home is not a place. It's the people we love, the memories we keep, the choices we make. Those words echoed in his mind, guiding him toward a decision. He had spent so much time clinging to his past, holding on to regrets and lost chances. But he knew, deep down, that he couldn't live in the past forever. Taking a deep breath, James restarted the engine, his hand steady as he turned the wheel to the right. He chose the path marked, "Face the Truth." As he began to drive down this new road, he felt both anxious and determined, unsure of what awaited him but certain that he had made the right choice. The road grew narrower, the trees closer together. There was something different about this path. It felt less like a road and more like a tunnel through his own mind, a passageway into hidden thoughts and fears he had avoided for years. The silence around him grew heavier, and with each passing mile, he felt as though he was moving closer to a part of himself he had never fully acknowledged. After a while, the road opened up into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an old, abandoned house. James felt a chill run through him as he recognized it. This was the house he had grown up in, the place where he had spent his childhood, filled with both happy and painful memories. The paint on the walls was faded, the windows cracked, but it was unmistakably the same house. He stepped out of the car, his feet sinking slightly into the soft earth. The air was cold, and every step he took toward the house felt heavier. As he reached the front door, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the handle. He wasn't sure what he would find inside, but he knew that he had to face it, whatever it was. Pushing the door open, he stepped into the dim, musty interior. The rooms were empty, shadows of his past echoing in the silence. He could almost hear the laughter and voices of his family, memories coming alive as he walked through the familiar halls. In the living room, he saw a small table with a stack of old letters on it. Letters he remembered writing but had never sent. One letter caught his eye. It was addressed to someone he had once loved deeply. A person he had left behind because he had been afraid of commitment, afraid of change. He picked up the letter, the paper yellowed with age, and began to read the words he had written so long ago. As he read, he felt the weight of regret settle over him. He had never told her how much she meant to him, never apologized for the way he had left. It was one of his deepest regrets, a wound he had carried for years. But standing here now, in this empty house, he felt a strange sense of closure. He couldn't change the past, but he could accept it, forgive himself, and move forward. A soft breeze blew through the house, stirring the dust and making the letters flutter on the table. James took a deep breath, letting go of the past, feeling a sense of freedom he hadn't known in years. He knew that he couldn't erase his mistakes, but he could choose to live differently from now on. As he turned to leave, he glanced back one last time at the house. It felt different now, less like a place of pain and more like a chapter he had finally finished reading. He walked out into the night, the air fresh and cool, carrying with him the memories, the lessons, and the forgiveness he had found. When he reached his car, he looked up at the stars shining brightly in the sky. He realized that his journey wasn't about finding a physical home. It was about finding peace within himself, about forgiving his mistakes and making peace with the life he had lived. With a renewed sense of purpose, James started the engine and headed back to the road, feeling lighter, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't know where the road would take him next, but he was ready, open to whatever lay ahead. This time he was truly on his way home. Part 6. The Truth Revealed. The road ahead seemed endless, stretching out into the night. But James felt a peace he had not known in a long time. He drove on, the steady hum of the car and the cool breeze through the open window comforting him. The journey had brought him so many things. Memories, regrets, but also understanding. He had faced the past and chosen to let it go. Now he could look ahead with clarity. As he drove, something began to shift. The trees, once dark and twisted, seemed to open up, revealing a quiet, open field bathed in moonlight. The road he had been following began to feel familiar again, as if it were guiding him toward something he had always known but had never fully seen. The horizon ahead was clearer now, and James had a strange feeling that his journey was coming to an end. He glanced at the dashboard again. This time, the clock was working. The time read 3 a.m., and he realized that he had been driving for hours, but he felt strangely awake, as if the road had been moving through him, not just beneath his feet. He could sense that something was about to change, something big, something that would finally give him the answers he had been searching for. In the distance, James saw a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a man, tall and silhouetted against the light of the moon. James slowed down and pulled over, his heart beginning to race with anticipation. Who could this be? He had seen no other cars on this road for miles, and the figure was the first sign of life he had encountered in what seemed like forever. As he got out of the car and approached the man, he noticed that the figure was staring at him, almost as if he had been waiting for James all along. The man didn't say anything at first, just watched him with quiet, knowing eyes. James felt a strange sense of recognition, as though he had seen this man before, though he couldn't place him. "You've come far, James," the man finally spoke. His voice was calm, steady, and somehow familiar. "You've seen what you needed to see." James felt his throat tighten. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled softly, as if he had been expecting the question. "I am the keeper of this road. The road you've been on. The road that led you to face your past and your truth." James blinked, trying to understand. "I don't understand. What does that mean?" The man nodded, his gaze never leaving James. "It means, James, that this road was never about finding a place. It was about finding yourself. You have been lost, not on a map, but in your own heart. And now, you have arrived at the final point of your journey." James felt his chest tighten as the realization began to dawn on him. He had been searching for a home, for something outside of himself, but the truth was, home had always been within him. All the time, all the memories, all the people he had lost. It was not about returning to the past or finding something he had lost. It was about accepting himself, forgiving himself, and moving forward. "Where do I go from here?" James asked, his voice shaky but filled with newfound understanding. The man stepped aside, his hands sweeping toward the horizon. "You found what you needed to find. The road ends here, but your journey continues. You are free to choose now, James. Choose to live, choose to love, choose to heal." James felt a tear slip down his cheek. The weight that had held him for so long was lifting. He had been so focused on the road, on the path, that he had forgotten one simple truth. He could always choose his next step. The past didn't define him. It was just a part of the story. The future, however, was his to write. With one last look at the figure, who now seemed to blend into the night like a part of the road itself, James turned back to his car. He felt lighter, freer than he ever had before. The answers he had been searching for were not something to find. They were something to understand. He got into his car, his hands steady on the wheel. For the first time, he didn't feel lost. He wasn't looking for a destination anymore. He was looking for the journey ahead, and he was ready to walk it with an open heart. The road stretched before him, the darkness now a canvas for the possibilities of tomorrow. As he drove away, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if to say, "You're on the right path." And for the first time in a long while, James felt truly at home. Not in a place, but in himself. He smiled softly. The road now a friend, a guide, and the beginning of something new. The long way home had finally led him to where he was always meant to be. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more exciting tales. Check out our other videos for more great content. and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for the next adventure. Thank you for watching.